I greet you all in the name of our Lord Jesus. This is Harbinger of the Last Trump. I want to bring to us a great revelation concerning and confirming events of this last day of this age, with their precise dates, with an incredible information from the past, which no human on earth have the knowledge of to this point. It is in regard to the prominent biblical figures and their connection with the 4 world wars God designed to occur to the end of this age, with the 4th concluding the same. The interesting thing about this phenomenon is the fact that the dates of the occurrence of these 4 world wars were regulated by God to measure the same time period between these biblical figures they are related to. I shall be proving this beyond doubt here with provable information. And this is going to bring to the awareness of the people of this generation the fact that this age of man has indeed come to an end. This is a secret God kept from man since the beginning of this reality, from the time of the flood of Noah. As a matter of fact, events are not just happening the time we see them happening. All that have been happening, or all that have happened on earth, and the ones happening now, and the ones soon to come, especially those related to God's plan on earth, had their time and dates of occurrence regulated by God before the earth was made. This might surprise you, but it is the truth. And one interesting thing about this reality is the fact that each of these world wars was designed by God to come towards the end part of a generational period, which measure 4 times between the beginning of creation and the end of this age, or at the beginning of the millennial era, which the general humanity may describe as a new dawn in the history of planet Earth. Concerning the date of events on Earth, note that all events of biblical significance between the beginning of creation and the end of this age, or further down the end of the next age to come, had the date of their occurrence prefixed by God before the planet Earth was made. This had been practically proven in my book entitled The Trinity Code. Concerning this, some writers and historians have discovered some events in the past in the history of man with their repetition in recent past, or some centuries after their primordial occurrence, occurring with a time pattern. But the truth is that there is no one man on earth that have been able to present more than 4 or 5 examples of this in one book, or up to 10 to 15 examples in his book ever written. But my book, The Trinity Code, listed over 100 examples. I mean, over 100 examples of this with their dates or time of occurrence no human can ever deny, based on the fact that they are all evident in our history and were proven in my book, The Trinity Code. In proving this number, note that one full chapter of over 20 pages of the book was dedicated to a myriad examples of this reality. In that chapter of the book, you shall be seeing that almost all events on earth had the date of their occurrence predetermined and some mathematically timed with certain secret time cycles way to the time of their occurrence, including the 4 world wars meant to occur to the end of this age, which is what I'm concentrating on in this message. Regarding this, for example, the date the Israelites came out of Egypt at the end of their 400-year captivity in that land, the date they finally conquered their enemies and settled down in the promised land, the date of the building of their first temple by the King Solomon, the date that temple was destroyed, the date its foundation was reconstructed after Judah came out of her first captivity in 538 BC, the date its second reconstruction began, the date the reconstructed temple or the second temple was finally destroyed, the date the third temple shall be built or rebuilt, and when it shall be polluted and be destroyed. The number of times Israel, or northern and southern kingdoms of Israel, should go into captivity. The number of times southern Israel, known today as Judah, should come out of captivity to the end of this age, or to the beginning of the millennium. The number of years for each captivity, the number of years they should be in the land, the number of years they should be away from the land to the end of this age, all the dates they went into captivity, and all the dates they should come out of their captivities, the number of years between the time they possessed the land of Canaan and the beginning of the millennium at their restored kingdom, etc., were all predetermined by God and mathematically timed before they ever became a nation, including the 2026 date of their last captivity in this age. These have all been proven beyond doubt in my book entitled The Trinity Code, or in the 5th chapter of the book. Go for it and verify this by yourself and see if I was bragging or not. It is one of such you are about hearing in this message, so sit tight and hear the incredible. Now, let's come back to the 4 world wars God intended to occur to the end of this age and their connection with 4 prominent biblical figures, just as the 4 generations he designated to span the period of this age and the 4 last Gentile empires of Daniel chapter 7 he intended also to rule the world to the end of this age in succession. Now, as was stated earlier, the children of men do not have the knowledge that the dates of the first, the second, the third, and the 4th World War, which humans call the 3rd World War, corresponds to the dates in the past when corresponding events took place between 4 prominent biblical figures, with reference to Adam, the father of the human race, Noah, whose children populated the earth after the great flood, and by which the people of the world were divided. Then Abraham, who was the father of the Hebrew race, and finally Christ the 4th, who is the father of the spiritual sons of God via Christianity. The dates of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th World War correspond to the date corresponding events in the past occurred, which measure between the dates of the birth of these prominent biblical figures. Before proving this, let's consider some other things in this regard. First, these events in the past and their later correspondence and their date of occurrence were intended by God to occur within 4 generational period from creation, whose beginning points experienced the birth of 3 of these 4 prominent biblical figures. Second, the beginning and end point of this 4 generational period marked the birth of empires or kingdoms of biblical recognition. For example, the prominent Babel kingdom of the great Nimrod. The period of this generation I'm talking about measured 2,166 years. Therefore, I'm talking about 2,166 years times 4 between creation and the end of this age in this regard. The majority of the sons of men are unaware of this. Meanwhile, the beginning part of these 4 world wars was intended by God to give birth to prominent kingdoms and empires meant to rule the world to the end of this age. This is coming on the platform of principle, which speaks of the birth of kingdoms through great wars, or the pang of great wars. Note that the popular 3 Punic Wars in Europe are also involved in this matter. Take note of this as we proceed. Before we go into the dates of the past wars and their later corresponding 4 world wars meant to occur to the end of this age, in relation to the 4 prominent biblical figures, let's see the 4 generations and each of the prominent figures born at their beginning point. The first generation began 35 years to the beginning of the Genesis creation event. The Pentecostal Adam came to being at the 85th year of the first generation, or at the beginning point of the second 84 years of the same, which measure 50 years of astronomical Pentecost from the beginning of creation. The prophet Noah was born at the 653rd year to the end of this first generation, and by implication, the 654th year to the beginning of the next generation. The father Abraham was born at the end of the first 168 years of the second generation from creation, which was the first 84 years times 2. Then Christ was likewise born at the end of the first 168 years of the third generation from creation, which was the first 84 years times 2 also. The third generation terminated at the year 1998, while the fourth began at 1999. These are the generations from creations and their beginning points, especially in which these prominent biblical figures were born. So we can use this information to verify events in this regard and their very date between these figures I'm about to reveal to us now in this revelation in relation to the world wars God intended to occur to the end of this age, including the third and the fourth world wars, and the precise date of their occurrence as was determined before the earth was made. Now, see it that the flood of Noah ended in the 601st year of his life, which was the 121st year of his call, that is 120 years to the flood plus 1 year to the end of the same. And between the birth of Adam, or the first Adam, and the end of the flood of Noah, which wiped out that titanic evil generation of his day, which was the first event of global destruction, measured 2030 years. That is, between the birth of Adam and the end of Noah's flood that ended the first world, measured 2030 years. Amazingly, between the last Adam, that is Christ, and the end of the Great Tribulation, designated by God to wipe out completely almost the entire population of this titanic, technological, and sodomic generation, also measure 2030 years. That is, at 2030. This is no joke, as the Bible itself says that events are meant to repeat themselves. You can find out in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 19 and chapter 3 verse 15. This is the first. Let's see the next. Abraham was born at 2166 BC precisely, a period which measures precisely the span of a generation or an age. You may recall I said earlier that the 3 Punic Wars in Europe are also involved in this phenomenon. So let's see it now. Between the birth of Abraham at 2166 BC and the end of the 3rd Punic War in Europe in 146 BC, measure precisely 2020 years. Then between the birth of Christ and the end of the secret Third World War, designed to bring about the event of the rapture, measure precisely 2020 years also, that is, at 2020. In confirming this, notice that between the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BC and the end of the secret Third World War at 2020, measure precisely a generational period of 2166 years. Check it out for yourself for confirmation. Now, see it that when the Third Punic War ended, 146 years measured to Christ at the beginning of the 2166 year period of the age of Pisces. Also, the end of the secret Third World War at 2020 measure 146 years to the time Christ shall be appearing in glory after building up Zion during the period of the millennium. And that date also measure a generational period of 2166 years from his birth, meaning 2166 AD marked the end of the generation of Pisces, whose beginning Christ was born. This is amazing. Now, let's see the last one in regards to the Second World War. This one has just 2-year difference, but it does not really make any big difference. I'm making this clear before us because there is no manipulation of time or figures in this divine revelation. So let's see it now. The Second Punic War began at 219 BC, and between 2 years to that date, that is 221 BC, 221 BC, and the end of the Second World War measure precisely a generational period of 2,166 years also. That is, between approximately the beginning of the Second Punic War and the end of the Second World War measure a generational period of 2,166 years. Check it out for yourself also for confirmation. Moreover, the truth is that between the end of Noah's flood and this 221 BC, which measure 2,166 years, to the end of the Second World War, also measure 2,166 years. That is, between the end of Noah's flood and 221 BC measure a generational period of 2,166 years precisely. Then notice that between the birth of Abraham at 2,166 BC and this same 221 BC, which measure 2,166 years to 1945, also measure 1945 years. That is, between the birth of Abraham and 221 BC measure 1945 years. Remember, I mentioned earlier that Abraham was born at 2166 BC. So do the mathematics and see this reality for yourself. Now, let's see some practical examples in our history where 221 year period, 221 year period measure between the end of notable wars or between the beginning point of notable wars and the birth of prominent empires, as with the prominent biblical figures in this divine revelation. First, let me recall the examples in the past so that with them we can see clearly the ones in our time I'm about to bring to our notice for the validation of this divine revelation. When the great flood of Noah ended, 221 years measured to the birth of Abraham. That was 53 years from the end of the flood, plus 168 years from the beginning of the next generation to the birth of Abraham. Take note of 53 and 168 years here for the confirmation of later examples. Now, when 2,166 years from the end of Noah's flood ended, almost at the beginning of the Second Punic War, 221 years also measured to the birth of Christ. Now, let's see the ones in our day that will convince you of the reality of this time period in relation to the date of notable events in the history of man as was determined by God. America, or the time of her birth, marked the beginning of modern history, which stretches to the end of this age. Now notice, between the birth of America in the year 1777 in the reckoning of the spirit and the end of the third generation from creation at 1998 measure precisely 221 years. 221 years. Remember the 53 and 168 year period I mentioned earlier concerning this 221 year period and the end of significant dates it usually marks. Then see it that between the beginning of the birth of America in 1777 and the end of the Second World War at the birth of her prominent empire in 1945 spanned precisely 168 years. Then when you add 53 years to 1945, it brings you to the year 1998, which marked the end of 6,000 years and the end of the third generation from creation, which began at 168 BC. Therefore, between 168 BC and 1998 measure 2,166 years precisely, a generational period. And notice that 168 BC was the date of the notable Roman Empire came on board after defeating the great Grecian Empire of the great Alexander at the end of the Battle of Pydna. Also note that it was America who took over from the defunct Roman Empire, which the Bible sees as her mother prophetically in the book of Isaiah chapter 47 verse 1. Interestingly, while the American Empire took over from the Roman Empire in 1945 at the end of the Great Second World War, which was 168 years from her birth in 1777. Also, 1945 years measured between 168 BC, the notable Roman Empire rose up from the Great War that brought about the defeat of the Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great, and 1777 America was born. So what we are seeing here is the birth of the Empire of America in 1945. And then between 168 BC, the Roman Empire came on board, and 1777 America was born from her Great Revolutionary War with Britain, also measure a period of 1945 years, that is 1945 years. And see it that while the Roman Empire was born in 168 BC, the Empire of America was likewise born 168 years from 1777 she was born. These are no coincidences, evidently. Now, let's see the last example of 221 years and its component parts of 53 and 168 years, measuring between the beginning or end part of significant events or dates in our history. You may recall I stated and revealed earlier that the end of the secret Third World War at 2020 measure 146 years to Christ at 2166 AD, which measure from his birth at the beginning of the generation of Pisces, which was the third generation, that is the third 2166 years from the beginning of creation. And I also proved with some examples 221 year period measuring to the end or to the beginning or between significant events or dates in relation to the prominent biblical figures especially. Now let's see these examples in this light. The end of the Second World War measured 221 years, that is 221 years precisely, to 2166 AD at the appearance of Christ in glory during the millennial period after building up Zion, as recorded in Psalms chapter 102 verse 16. And notice that between the end of the Second World War in 1945 and the end of the third generation from creation, which marked the end of 6,000 years in 1998, spanned a period of 53 years. And then the beginning of 7,000 years from 1999 measure 168 years to 2166 AD of the appearance of Christ after building up Zion during the millennium. This is very clear and convincing. In conclusion, we can see that indeed the dates of the world wars designed to conclude this age and other significant wars in the past were all measured between the time or birth of these four prominent biblical figures and fathers of humanity. These were all practically proven. They say facts are undeniable. Therefore, know it that all the dates I mentioned here in relation to the end of the secret Third World War at the rapture and the end of the Great Tribulation at 2030, etc., are all real and should not be taken for granted. Remember that in Amos chapter 3, verse 7, the Lord spoke through the prophet Amos that the Lord shall do nothing, but he revealed his secrets to his servants, the prophets. This is one of such, evidently. Let him that hath an ear, let him hear. If you wish to contact me on this, you can do so on Facebook through Kenneth Ogra, or through my Facebook page, The Trinity Code. The Trinity is spelled 3-N-I-T-Y, not T-R-O-I-N-I-T-Y. Or contact me on my other Facebook page, Harbinger of the Last Trump. Harbinger of the Last Trump. You can email me at kennethogra53@gmail.com, or simply call these numbers +234 90 233 70387 or +234 811 33 834. They are on the screen also. And for other videos concerning the rapture and the purpose of COVID-19 in relation to the rapture, and my video where I reveal the greatest secret about America, her 252-year lifespan, and her last 10 years from the year 2021, which no human being on earth have the knowledge of. You can search for them in Facebook video search area. You can search for them under Harbinger of the Last Trump, or under Harbinger of the Last Covenant, or you can search for them under Harbinger. Forward this video to as many as you can. Download it on Facebook for proper attention and for alerting others what is imminent. You can see from this message that there is no more time. Therefore, get yourself prepared, for the Lord is coming in no time. Remain raptured. God bless you for watching.